In the realm of alternative dimensions and metaphysical theory, the phenomenon of a shadow has long been treated as merely the result of blocked light. Yet, what if the simple projection is actually something far more profound? According to a new speculative hypothesis in occult interpretation, the human shadow may not be a passive byproduct of light and body, but rather an active echo, an imperfect projection of a parallel world self. This theory suggests that when one's shadow appears slightly distorted, flickering, or behaving inconsistently with light sources, it could be a visible trace of interference from another version of oneself existing in a different dimension. The basis of this interpretation lies in the concept of the multiverse, where infinite versions of the same individual live out slightly or vastly different lives across parallel timelines. Normally, these versions of the self remain completely isolated, as each universe adheres to its own physical laws and timeline. However, moments of high emotional intensity, altered states of consciousness, or fluctuations in environmental energy, such as geomagnetic storms or shifts in electromagnetic resonance, may briefly weaken the barriers between these timelines. When this happens, a temporary bleed-through can occur. The human shadow, traditionally perceived as a purely physical phenomenon, becomes in this theory a visual metaphor or even a sensor for detecting these cross-dimensional disturbances. When a parallel self experiences a strong moment of decision, fear, or transformation, the energetic ripple and vibrate across dimensional planes. If the versions of the self are closely aligned, living similar lives in nearly identical universes, those ripples may manifest in small but noticeable ways. A common sign, according to this interpretation, is an odd distortion in the shadow. It may elongate unnaturally, split for a fraction of a second, or momentarily move out of sync with the physical body. Such occurrences are typically dismissed as lighting anomalies or tricks of the eye. However, proponents of this theory argue that these errors are meaningful, revealing the fluid, layered nature of identity and space-time. The subtle alterations in one's shadow are seen not as mistakes in lighting, but as overlaps between oneself and a slightly out-of-phase version in another world. In other words, the shadow is not merely cast by the light behind you, but also by the unseen self beside you. This view reframes the shadow not as something that follows, but as something that reflects, sometimes inaccurately, due to dimensional shifts. There have been numerous anecdotal accounts throughout history, especially in folklore, where people claim to have seen their shadow act on its own, pause while they moved, or stretch unnaturally. These have often been interpreted as spiritual omens or signs of possession, but this theory suggests a modern reinterpretation. What was once seen as haunting may actually be an echo of one's parallel consciousness crossing a fragile boundary. These interactions are not always sinister. They may be neutral or even protective in nature. For example, some occult traditions say that the shadow holds hidden knowledge about the self, acting as a guardian of the subconscious. This hypothesis aligns well with that idea, positing that the parallel self has an interest in synchronizing its experiences or influencing decisions to create balance across realities. When that self succeeds in doing so, it may briefly manifest as a tug on the fabric of one's shadow, visible only to those sensitive enough to notice. The concept further extends to dreams and altered states. When people report vivid dreams of encountering themselves in different scenarios, they may be experiencing partial alignment with a parallel life. The body may remain still, but the energy pattern, the aura if you will, might distort in a way that subtly shifts how the shadow behaves upon waking. Some even believe that during astral projection or deep meditative states, the shadow's form may change in accordance with what the mind has contacted in another timeline. These impressions, while fleeting, remain etched in the shadow like a kind of invisible scar. In the next section, we will explore how shadow distortions have been documented throughout history and what scientific or esoteric frameworks might support the plausibility of this phenomenon from both metaphysical and psychological perspectives. Throughout history, records of mysterious shadow anomalies have appeared across cultures, often described in religious texts, myths, and oral traditions. In many ancient societies, the shadow was not simply considered a passive entity, but a crucial part of the soul. In ancient Egypt, for instance, the shoot was the shadow aspect of a person and was believed to continue existing after death, retaining a part of the person's essence. In various African and Native American traditions, it is said that to lose one's shadow, or to have it behave independently, signals spiritual imbalance or external influence. When viewed through the lens of the parallel self theory, these stories take on new significance. The fear of shadow disobedience may not stem from superstition alone, but from an ancient intuitive understanding that the shadow sometimes behaves as a bridge between dimensions. The idea that something is wrong when the shadow acts unexpectedly might not be fear of ghosts or curses, but rather a primal recognition that dimensional interference is occurring, something that human perception has not yet learned to process. In modern times, these experiences are often categorized under shadow people sightings, brief glimpses of dark humanoid forms moving independently of any known source of light or body. Some researchers in the paranormal community suggest these figures may not be external entities, but fragmented visual manifestations of one's parallel self, a shadow of the shadow, so to speak, caught in moments of dimensional overlap. This hypothesis reinterprets the terrifying aspect of such sightings not as threats, but as echoes of another self navigating through similar moments in time. Psychologically, Carl Jung's notion of the shadow as a repressed part of the psyche also harmonizes with this concept. Jung believed that every person carries within them a shadow, a hidden self made up of unconscious desires, instincts, and potential. If we merge this internal shadow with the external, visual shadow distorted by parallel interference, we are left with a composite being, one that bridges not only the conscious and unconscious mind, but also multiple timelines of experience. From a metaphysical standpoint, researchers have proposed that certain conditions may increase the likelihood of witnessing these distortions. Environments charged with electromagnetic energy, such as those near tectonic fault lines, volcanic areas, or locations with high mineral content, especially quartz, are believed to be hotspots for dimensional anomalies. These thin places, as Celtic tradition calls them, may allow the barriers between realities to waver, making shadow distortions more likely. Furthermore, technology might be inadvertently revealing these interactions. There are anecdotal reports of cameras capturing shadow anomalies that were not visible to the naked eye at the time of filming. Shadows flickering independently, elongating, or changing direction in ways that defy the logic of light sources. While most dismiss these as glitches or compression artifacts, some suggest they may be visual evidence of dimensional shifts captured digitally. In a way, the camera becomes a passive observer of phenomena that human senses are too limited to fully comprehend. Interestingly, certain esoteric traditions teach that one can learn to read the behavior of one's shadow as a form of spiritual navigation. If the shadow trembles, splits, or moves with hesitation, it is taken as a sign that the self is misaligned across dimensions. Practitioners are taught to realign themselves through grounding rituals, mirror meditation, or reciting harmonic vibrations believed to stabilize one's presence within a singular timeline. These practices are said to reduce confusion, nightmares, déjà vu episodes, and existential disorientation, symptoms some associate with unstable dimensional presence. Perhaps most intriguingly, the theory offers a new interpretation of synchronicity. When you experience strange coincidences, meeting someone at the exact right moment, hearing a song that answers an internal question, or sensing déjà vu, it might be that your parallel selves have briefly converged in thought, intention, or emotion. These echoes then ripple outward, sometimes showing up as changes in the behavior of your shadow, a phenomenon you barely notice consciously, but one that your intuition registers as significant. In conclusion, the concept that a human shadow may reflect the interference of a parallel world self challenges our conventional understanding of space, time, and selfhood. It proposes that reality is not linear nor entirely isolated, but layered, interconnected, and full of subtle signs, if we know where to look. The shadow becomes not only a companion in light, but a silent messenger from the boundaries of our dimensional identity. Whether one interprets this as metaphor, psychological insight, or literal possibility, it encourages a profound reconsideration of how we understand presence, perception, and the unseen architectures of reality.